My husband had a heart attack on a Tuesday, which was the most ordinary day of the week for the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me. He was 43 years old. He coached his company's softball team and made terrible puns at breakfast and always remembered to call my mother on her birthday. I was 31 when the paramedics told me there was nothing more they could do, and I stood in the hospital hallway in the blazer I'd worn to a client meeting that morning because I had not yet had the chance to go home and change. That detail stayed with me. I never threw that blazer away, but I never wore it again either. His name was Daniel Ashford. We had been married for 6 years. He was a civil engineer who had quietly, over the course of the last decade, accumulated patents on water filtration systems. He had designed himself patents he had never once mentioned to me in any significant way. The facility where he stored his research equipment and prototypes, a converted warehouse on the edge of Pittsburgh's old industrial corridor, he had always called it the Millbrook property. Just an old investment, he'd say whenever I asked. Nothing worth getting into. And because I was a forensic accountant who spent her days buried in other people's financial irregularities, I had trusted that he would tell me when something was worth getting into. That trust turned out to be both correct and catastrophically incomplete. The morning after Daniel's funeral, I sat in the office of his attorney, Diane Park. Diane was meticulous and direct, the kind of woman who did not use 3 words when 2 would do. My younger sister Jess sat beside me, still in the black dress from the service, scrolling through her phone without really looking at it. She had driven 4 hours from Columbus the night Daniel died and had not yet been back. She hadn't asked when she should leave. I hadn't asked her to. Across the table, Daniel's best friend and former business partner, Marcus Reed, had positioned himself in the corner chair nearest the door. He was 46, silver at the temples, wearing a gray suit that fit him exactly right. He'd delivered the eulogy. He had cried at the right moments. Several people had told me afterward what a good friend he was, what a loss this must be for him too. Diane set a sealed envelope on the table in front of me. "Claire," she said, "Daniel left specific instructions. This was not to be opened until after the service." I looked at the envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting, which I had not seen since the grocery list he'd left on the counter the morning he died. Eggs. Coffee. The good kind of orange juice. I had not been able to throw it away. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page and a small key on a plain metal ring. The note was brief. His handwriting was careful and unhurried, like he had written it during a quiet afternoon and not in anticipation of anything terrible. "Claire, if you're reading this, I need you to go to Millbrook before you talk to anyone else about it. Everything is in the main server room. The key opens the secondary entrance on the east side. The passcode is your father's birthday reversed. There is a woman named Ruth Calloway who manages the property. She knows you're coming. Trust her completely. Don't let Marcus handle anything before you've seen it yourself. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought I had more time." I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my coat pocket. Marcus leaned forward from his corner chair. He had the tone of someone who had already decided what was going to happen next. "Daniel talked to me about Millbrook," he said. "I know it looks complicated, but I can walk you through everything. We actually had an agreement in place for a potential sale. I have the documents. It would simplify the estate considerably." I looked at him for a moment. I had known Marcus for 6 years. He had been to our house for dinner more times than I could count. He had a photograph of Daniel and himself on his desk that had been there since before I came into the picture. "That can wait," I said. "I need to see the property first." He smiled. "Of course, take all the time you need. But the interested buyer has a window, a few weeks at most." Jess glanced at me sideways. She had met Marcus a dozen times. She liked him. Most people did. On the drive to Millbrook, Jess asked me what was in the note. I told her the important parts. She was quiet for a block or two. "Why would he say that about Marcus?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet." She picked at the hem of her dress. "Marcus seems like he's just trying to help." "I know he does," I said. The warehouse district on the east side of Pittsburgh in November is the color of old concrete and rust. I had driven past Millbrook a handful of times over the years, but I had never stopped. Daniel had always been vague about whether I was welcome. He never said I couldn't go. He just never invited me. I had filed that away under things my husband did not discuss and moved on, the way you do when you trust someone. Ruth Calloway was waiting at the east entrance just like Daniel's note said she would be. She was in her mid-60s, short hair going silver, wearing a canvas work vest with a notepad sticking out of the front pocket. She shook my hand with both of hers. He talked about you constantly, she said. I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry about the circumstances. Inside, the building was warmer than I expected. The main floor was orderly, lined with workbenches and shelving units holding sealed prototype housings and equipment I didn't have names for. The lighting was industrial but clean. Everything had a label. The whole space had the feeling of a place that was worked in regularly, methodically, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Ruth took us to the server room at the back, a smaller interior space lined with computer equipment and filing cabinets. On the central desk sat a laptop and a printed card with a 4-digit code. Daniel's instructions had already given me the passcode, and when I entered it, the laptop opened to a folder simply labeled "For Claire." Inside was a video file. I clicked it. Daniel looked healthy on camera. He was wearing the old blue Henley he favored on weekends. He looked directly at the lens with an expression I recognized, the one he used when he was explaining something he considered important. "Claire," he said, "I know I owe you more than a video. You deserve a real explanation, and I'm sorry I ran out of time to give you one. The patents in Millbrook are worth considerably more than I told you. I filed the original designs 10 years ago, and I've been building on them since. There are 3 municipal water authorities in the Northeast that have signed letters of intent to license the filtration system. The projected revenue over the next decade is in the 40 million range." Jess made a small sound beside me. I kept my eyes on the screen. "Marcus has known about the valuation for about 8 months, Daniel continued. He came to me with a private acquisition offer from a company called Stratum Infrastructure. The deal would have required assigning the patents outright. I told him no. I've been developing this technology for communities that can't afford corporate pricing, and I wasn't going to let it get locked behind a paywall. Marcus didn't agree with that decision. He stopped speaking to me about it directly after that. But he's still in contact with Stratum. I know because Ruth found a transmittal letter in the equipment room addressed to their legal department. Please be careful. He will try to position himself as a neutral party. He is not." The video ended. I sat with my hands flat on the desk for a moment. Jess hadn't moved. "Dad always said Daniel was the real deal," she said quietly. She meant it as a compliment. She also sounded a little shaken. Ruth had been standing near the door. She stepped forward and set a manila folder on the desk. "I found this 2 weeks before Daniel passed," she said. "I gave it to him immediately. He told me to keep a copy." Inside the folder was a letter on Stratum Infrastructure letterhead addressed to Marcus, confirming the terms of an exclusivity agreement for the Ashford water filtration portfolio. It was dated 4 months after Daniel told him no. My hands were very steady. That was a thing I had always been grateful for. My hands stayed steady even when everything else didn't. "He went ahead with it anyway," I said. Ruth nodded. "There's more." She opened a second cabinet and handed me a printed email chain. The thread ran for months. Marcus had been corresponding with a Stratum attorney about how to complete the transfer in the event of a change in ownership. They had discussed in some detail what documentation would be needed to establish authority over the estate. Jess read over my shoulder. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is bad." "Yes," I said. "He was at the funeral," Jess said. "He cried." "I know," I said. We spent the next 2 hours in the server room. Ruth walked me through every folder on the laptop: patent filings, engineering specifications, municipal letters of intent, financial projections. Daniel had organized everything with the same precision he brought to everything else he did. Ruth had worked for him for 4 years, and she knew the system as well as he had. She pulled files the way someone pulls out shelving that had always been exactly where they said it would be. By the time we came up for air, it was past 6, and the sky outside the high windows was fully dark. "I need to call Diane," I said. Ruth poured coffee from a thermos she'd brought without mentioning it. I appreciated that. Diane answered on the second ring. I told her about the video, the transmittal letter, and the email chain. I read her the key passages without editorializing. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Send me everything tonight," she said. "I'll have a preliminary read by morning. Has Marcus filed anything?" "Not that I know of. He may be waiting to see what you do first. Call me before you speak to him again." Jess drove us back to the house Daniel and I had shared. She was quieter than usual, which for Jess was very quiet indeed. She made tea without asking and set a mug in front of me at the kitchen table, and then she sat across from me with her hands wrapped around her own cup. "I feel stupid," she said. "You couldn't have known. I kept thinking he just wanted to help." She stared at her tea. "He brought food to the reception. He He was so nice about everything. That's not stupidity, I said. That's trust. It's different. She looked up. What are we going to do? We're going to be methodical, I said. That's what I do. I had been a forensic accountant for 8 years. My job was to find things that were hidden in plain sight, to follow numerical trails through intentionally confusing terrain, to reconstruct what had happened from what remained. I was not the kind of person who acted on feeling. I was the kind of person who built a case first. I spent most of that night with Diane's secure file system, uploading scans of everything Ruth had given me, patent filings, the Stratum correspondence, the email chain. I created a timeline document with dates and dollar amounts. I noted the gap between Daniel's refusal and the signing of Marcus's exclusivity agreement. I noted the window of time during which Stratum had asked about estate transfer documentation. I noted the way that window lined up with the timing of Daniel's death. I wasn't suggesting anything. I was documenting. Jess found me at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning. She had not slept much either. He texted me last night, she said, holding up her phone. Marcus? She nodded. He said he heard I was handling things with you. He said he'd been through this kind of loss before and he knew how hard the estate process could be. He said if I wanted to talk through the Millbrook situation, he was available any time. I looked at her. She already knew what it meant. He wants a way in through you, she said. Yes, I said. What should I tell him? Nothing yet. I said, just leave it. She set her phone face down on the table. Okay, then tell me what to do. I handed her a list. I needed her to call both of the municipal water authorities whose contact information appeared in Daniel's letters of intent and confirm that the agreements were still active and had not been transferred or modified. I needed her to pull a corporate registration record for Stratum Infrastructure. I needed her to keep her phone with her and tell me immediately if Marcus contacted her again. She wrote everything down without arguing. I hadn't expected that. I was glad for it. Diane called at 8. She had read everything. Her voice had the particular quality it took on when she was choosing words precisely. The exclusivity agreement Marcus signed with Stratum is legally meaningless, she said. He had no authority to offer it. But Stratum may not know that, or they may be counting on the estate process creating enough ambiguity to push through a settlement. I'm going to file a notice with the county registrar this morning establishing you as sole administrator of the estate. That will prevent any transfers without your signature. What about the exclusivity agreement itself? That's a civil matter at minimum, potentially more depending on what the email chain shows. I want a fraud consultant to review it. Do it, I said. There's something else, Diane said. Marcus submitted a letter to my office yesterday. He's claiming Daniel verbally authorized him to negotiate on behalf of the estate in the final weeks before his death. He says he has a witness. I sat with that for a moment. Can he prove it? That's exactly what I'm going to find out, Diane said. I went back to Millbrook that afternoon. Ruth was there, and she had pulled something new, a secondary server backup she had not thought to show me the day before because she hadn't realized its significance. It contained a folder of audio recordings Daniel had made on his phone during meetings. He had labeled them by date and subject with the same precision he labeled everything else. The third file in the folder was labeled Meeting with Marcus R.E. Stratum Final. I played it on Ruth's laptop with Jess standing beside me. Daniel's voice was clear and calm. Marcus, he was saying, I've told you twice. I'm not selling the patents outright. Not to Stratum, not to anyone who'll lock this behind a corporate pricing model. Marcus's voice came through slightly farther from the mic. You're leaving $40 million on the table. The municipal deals don't come close to that. They come close enough, Daniel said, and they put the technology where it needs to go. There was a pause. Then Marcus said, what if something happened and the estate went into administration? Would Claire know enough to hold the line? Nothing is going to happen to me, Daniel said. But if it did, then she'd figure it out. She's the sharpest person I know, Marcus. There was another pause. Then the recording ended. Jess had both hands over her mouth. Ruth stood perfectly still. I saved the file and backed it up in 3 places before I said anything. Send this to Diane, I said to Jess. She was already reaching for her phone. Marcus called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was warm and concerned and unhurried. He said he'd heard from Diane about the estate filing, and he wanted me to know he thought it was the right call. He said he was only trying to protect Daniel's legacy. He said the Stratum deal was actually very favorable once you understood the full picture. He said he hoped we could sit down soon. I listened to it twice and then sent a copy to Diane. That night, Jess and I sat at the kitchen table with printed copies of the timeline I'd built. I had laid it out in columns, dates, events, Marcus's known actions, Stratum's known communications, Daniel's recordings. He knew Marcus was watching him, Jess said. He knew something, I said. He just didn't know when. She ran her finger along the column of dates. The exclusivity agreement, the estate administration, question in the recording. The witness letter Marcus filed with Diane. She connected the dots without me having to walk her through them. She looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She sat up a little straighter instead. I want to come to every meeting, she said. Good, I said. The next 2 days were administrative. Diane filed the estate notice and got a return confirmation from the county registrar. I contacted the 2 municipal water authorities myself and introduced myself as Daniel's wife and administrator of his estate. Both contacts were cooperative. One of them mentioned that Marcus had called their office the week before, asking about the status of the letters of intent. I made a note of the date. Ruth called on the second afternoon with something new. The facility had a secondary entrance on the west side of the building, one I hadn't looked at on my first visit. The lock on that entrance had been scratched. Not broken, but scratched, in the way a lock looks when someone has tested it with a key that was close but not quite right. I drove back out immediately. The scratches were recent. Ruth had photographed them that morning. I photographed them again myself and sent both sets to Diane. Who has keys to this building? I asked Ruth. Me, she said. You now. And Daniel had one. He kept it with his personal effects, which were at our house. She nodded carefully. I went home and checked the drawer where Daniel kept spare keys. His Millbrook key was gone. I called Diane from the driveway. I need a locksmith at the facility today, I said. New locks, new codes, everything. Done, Diane said. What happened? Someone tried to get in, I said, and they had something close to the right key. There was a pause. Do you want to think about who might have had access to Daniel's things in the last 3 weeks? I was already thinking about it. Marcus had been to the house for the reception. He had moved freely through the space along with 40 other people. He had been very gracious and very present, and I had not watched him the way I would have watched him if I'd known then what I knew now. I'll handle it, I said. That evening, Marcus came to the house uninvited. He knocked and stood on the porch with his hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man paying a condolence call. Jess answered the door before I could stop her. She stepped outside and pulled the door almost closed behind her, which I hadn't expected. I watched through the side window. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I could see from Marcus's expression that it was not going the way he expected. When Jess came back inside, she was pale but composed. He wanted to know if you'd looked at the Millbrook files, she said. What did you tell him? I told him we were handling the estate and all communications needed to go through Diane. I looked at her. She lifted one shoulder. That's what you would have said. Yes, I said. It is. I don't want him in this house, she said. He won't be, I said. The following week, Ruth introduced me to a man named Gil Torrance, who had been a water systems engineer for the city of Pittsburgh for 22 years before retiring. Daniel had consulted him informally during the development phase. Ruth had thought to call him when things started moving quickly. He drove to Millbrook and walked me through the technical specifications of the filtration patents in a way I could actually follow, which I appreciated. The short version, Gil said, spreading schematic drawings across the workbench, is that Daniel solved a problem every municipal water authority in the country has been trying to solve for a decade. Low-cost, scalable filtration for aging infrastructure. The 3 municipalities he signed with are the beginning. If this goes to open licensing the way he intended, you're looking at a national rollout. What would Stratum do with it? I asked. Same technology, Gil said. Different price point. Different access model. Cities with budget constraints, smaller communities, rural systems, they wouldn't be able to afford it. That was the argument Daniel and Marcus had. Daniel thought the technology belonged to the people who needed it most. Marcus thought you maximize the value while you have it. Jess was taking notes at the end of the table. She looked up. So Marcus wasn't wrong about the money. No, Gil said. He was wrong about the priority. I want you to be willing to speak to that, I told Gil. If it comes to a formal proceeding. He nodded without hesitation. I'll say exactly what I just said to you. Daniel built this for communities, not for shareholders. Diane scheduled the mediation for the following Thursday. It was held in a conference room at a downtown law office on the 15th floor, neutral territory. Marcus arrived with his own attorney, a compact man who carried a leather portfolio and did not make eye contact with me. Jess sat to my right. Diane sat to my left. On the table in front of us was a neatly organized stack of folders. Patent filings. The Stratum correspondence. The email chain. The unauthorized exclusivity agreement. The recording. The scratched lock photographs. The timeline. The mediator was a retired circuit judge named Elaine Marsh. She had the particular patience of someone who had heard every version of every argument and was waiting to see which version of this one we were going to try. Marcus spoke first. He was composed and reasonable. He said Daniel had asked him to explore strategic options for the patents. He said the Stratum discussion was exploratory, not binding. He said he had only been trying to protect an asset that Daniel had worked on for a decade. He said it would be a shame to let the technology stagnate in an estate dispute when it could be doing good in the world. He was persuasive. He probably knew he was persuasive. He had been being persuasive for a long time. When Judge Marsh turned to me, I opened the first folder. "This is the exclusivity agreement Mr. Reed signed with Stratum Infrastructure," I said. "It was executed 4 months after my husband explicitly refused to proceed with the sale. Mr. Reed had no authority to sign it." I slid the recording transcript across the table. "This is a transcript of an audio recording my husband made during his final conversation with Mr. Reed about Stratum. I have the original file. He made his position clear. Mr. Reed proceeded anyway." Marcus's attorney leaned toward him. Marcus kept his expression even. I put the email chain in front of Judge Marsh. "This correspondence shows that Mr.25.com. Reed and Stratum's legal team discussed how to complete a patent transfer in the event of a change in estate ownership. That conversation happened 2 months before my husband died. The room was quiet. I have 2 municipal water authorities who will confirm that Mr. Reed contacted them in the weeks following my husband's death to inquire about the status of their letters of intent. He did not identify himself as a party to the estate. I have a retired engineer willing to testify about the intended licensing model and how the proposed Stratum sale would have contradicted it. And I have photographs of a secondary entrance to the Millbrook facility where someone attempted to gain access with an unauthorized key approximately 10 days after my husband's death." Judge Marsh set down her pen. "Mr. Reed, do you have anything to offer that addresses the audio recording directly?" Marcus's attorney whispered something. Marcus looked at me rather than at Marsh. "Daniel was my best friend for 20 years, he said. "I thought I was protecting what he built." "My husband was my best friend," I said, "and he built it to work a specific way. He told you that clearly. You chose not to listen." Jess had not looked away from Marcus once during the entire exchange. Marcus looked at his hands. His attorney whispered again. Then Marcus said quietly, "What do you want?" Diane slid a prepared document across the table. "You withdraw from the estate proceedings. You retract the exclusivity agreement in writing to Stratum. You return any copies of documents or equipment you removed from the Millbrook property. We won't pursue civil damages beyond that, and will leave the criminal referral question to the Attorney General's discretion." Marcus's attorney reviewed it. They conferred. The attorney placed the document in front of Marcus and pointed to the signature line. Marcus picked up the pen and held it for a long moment. He looked at me once more. "She knew," he said, "about the patents. She's known for years longer than you think." "I'm going to need you to be more specific," I said, "because I don't know who she is." He hesitated. Then he signed the document. Judge Marsh collected it and handed copies to both attorneys. "This agreement will be filed with the court today. All actions against the Ashford estate are withdrawn. Any pending communications with Stratum must include written confirmation of the retraction. I'll note for the record that this matter has been referred to the State Attorney General." Diane closed her folder. "We're done here." Outside on the sidewalk, the November air smelled of exhaust and the river. Diane tucked the signed papers into her briefcase and told me she'd call by end of day. Jess stood with her coat buttoned up to the collar, watching the building doors. "What do you think he meant?" she said, "about her knowing." "I don't know," I said honestly. "Are you going to find out?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. "Okay, I'll help." We rode back to Millbrook in silence. Ruth was waiting at the east entrance the way she had been that first afternoon, except this time she had a fresh pot of coffee and 3 mugs and a small smile that she was working to keep measured. "How did it go?" she asked. "He signed," I said. She exhaled slowly and handed me a mug. "Daniel would have found a way to be gracious about that," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." Inside, we cleared the server room table and spread out the next set of tasks. The stratum retraction needed to go out by morning. The municipal water authorities needed a formal letter from me confirming the estate's commitment to the original licensing model. Gil Torrance was available to consult on the technical side of any renegotiation. And Marcus's comment about her knowing was sitting in my head like a file I hadn't opened yet. I searched the patent registration records that evening and found a name I didn't recognize listed as a secondary contact on one of Daniel's earliest filings from 12 years ago before we'd met. A woman named Carla Voss, listed as a research consultant. She had signed off on 3 initial specifications and then disappeared from the record entirely. I wrote the name down and set it aside. Not tonight. Tonight there was enough. Jess stayed at the house again. She had stopped talking about when she was going back to Columbus. I had stopped asking. She made dinner while I drafted the municipal letters, and we ate at the kitchen table with the TV off and the patent files stacked at one end of the table, no longer looking like a threat but like a project. Something to work through systematically, piece by piece, the way you do when you know what you're dealing with. The locksmith had been to Millbrook that afternoon. New locks, new codes. Ruth had the keys. I had the keys. No one else. I called Diane from the kitchen after dinner. "The filing is confirmed," she said. I also heard from the Attorney General's office. They opened a preliminary inquiry. "Good," I said. "There's something else." She paused in the way she did when she had information she was deciding how to frame. The witness Marcus claimed would testify that Daniel gave verbal authorization that witness withdrew. Apparently, after the recording transcript became part of the record, she reconsidered. "Her," I said. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Claire." "It's fine," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know you're not," she said. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while. Through the kitchen window, the backyard was dark. Daniel had put in a garden out there the second spring we lived in the house. It had gotten out of hand by the end of summer in that particular enthusiastic way his projects tended to, overgrown and sprawling and somehow still producing things. He had more time, I thought. That was the thing. He thought he had more time. Jess came in and refilled both our coffee cups without being asked. She sat down across from me. "I have a question," she said. "Okay." She looked at the table for a moment. Was he happy? At the end, I mean, before everything. Was he happy with what he was doing? "Yes," I said. "I think he was happier about the work than about almost anything else." "Then we protect it the right way," she said, "like he intended." "Yes," I said. She picked up her mug. "So what's next?" I pulled the patent files toward me. We established the licensing trust the way he designed it. Open access, community pricing, the municipal rollout as the model. Gil can advise on the technical parameters. Diane will structure the legal framework. I want you on the board. Her eyebrows went up. "Me? You've been in every step of this," I said. "Daniel always thought you were sharper than you gave yourself credit for. He told me that once. He was right." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Okay." The next morning I drove to Millbrook alone for the first time. The building was quiet. Ruth had already been in to check the sensors and was out doing rounds. I sat at Daniel's desk in the server room and opened the For Claire folder on the laptop. I had not watched all the files. There were more video messages, short ones, technical ones, instructions for how to handle different scenarios. I worked through them one by one. In the last file, the timestamp was only 8 days before he died. He looked tired. He looked like himself. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said. "Not about the patents. About how much I needed you to know about this. I kept thinking I'd have a better moment. A vacation maybe, or a quiet weekend when I could walk you through everything properly. I kept putting it off the way you put off things you want to go well. I didn't want to make it complicated. I didn't want to make it feel like I was bringing you in to manage a problem instead of a vision. It was always a vision, Claire. The whole time. I just needed the right conditions to show you." He looked at the camera. "You'll figure it out," he said. "You always do. I'm sorry you have to do it this way." I sat with that for a while. Then I closed the laptop and went to find Ruth to start work on the licensing trust. The building was quiet and orderly in the late morning light. Outside, the industrial district was its usual gray and rust. Inside, Daniel's workbenches and equipment were exactly where he had put them, waiting for the next phase of whatever he had been building. It still felt like a vision to me. I was going to make sure it stayed that way.